1 in 5 people will experience a relationship with someone who shows strong narcissistic traits, but almost none will recognize it until it's too late. Because narcissists don't break you with fists, they dismantle you with confusion. And empaths? They're the perfect match, not because they're weak, but because they feel everything. But here's the twist no one talks about. When the empath finally wakes up, when they stop feeding the game, it's the narcissist who starts to crumble. This video is not about revenge. It's about understanding the silent power of the empath, and how your calm presence alone can become the most devastating truth a narcissist will ever face. If you are, or have ever been, in this kind of relationship, leave a like. And if something resonates with your story, share it in the comments. Or just say thank you. Sometimes that's all it takes to feel seen. Carl Jung once said, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves." But what if the person standing in front of you doesn't want to understand themselves at all? What if they've built their entire identity on avoiding that confrontation, and you, unknowingly, become the mirror they can't escape? Neuroscience has revealed something chilling. People with strong narcissistic traits show reduced gray matter in the anterior insula, the part of the brain responsible for empathy and emotional self-awareness. Meanwhile, empaths show heightened activity in that exact region. You're literally wired to feel more. And that difference, that's not just biological. It's a weapon. When an empath meets a narcissist, something happens beneath the surface, something neither of them fully understands at first. According to Dr. Ramani Durvasula, one of the leading voices in narcissistic abuse recovery, this dynamic is energetically unbalanced. She calls it a war the empath didn't sign up for. But here's the twist. The empath's strength lies not in what they do, but in what they are. Imagine this. You're calm. You're present. You feel things deeply, and you don't fake your reactions. The narcissist, who thrives on performance, validation, and emotional chaos, sees you and is instinctively threatened. Why? Because your authenticity exposes their act. Your ability to stay rooted makes their instability visible. Freud believed the ego fights to protect itself from annihilation. The narcissist doesn't just have a big ego, they are their ego. When you're kind without agenda, patient without expectation, and real without needing recognition, it confronts them with a truth they've spent their life avoiding. They are hollow inside. A 2014 study published in Personality and Individual Differences found that individuals high in narcissistic traits experience significant distress when confronted with emotionally attuned people. The reason? Emotional attunement triggers shame. Not guilt, shame. Because shame is about identity. Guilt says, I did something wrong. Shame says, I am something wrong. And that's the invisible war. You, simply by existing as you are, reflective, calm, real, become a walking confrontation. Not by fighting, by being. Let me show you how this plays out in real life. In therapy sessions, many victims of narcissistic abuse report that everything seemed fine until I stopped reacting. One woman, who had spent 7 years in a relationship with a covert narcissist, said the most violent arguments erupted the day she stopped defending herself. She said nothing. She just looked. He couldn't take it. Her silence was louder than a scream. Empaths are not passive. They're observant. They track tone, pause, micro-expressions. And narcissists? They hate being observed too closely. Because it's not admiration. It's insight. Marcus Aurelius, the great Stoic emperor, wrote, "If someone does wrong, it's because they believe it is right." But what happens when you, with your steady presence and emotional clarity, reveal to the narcissist that their actions are not right, not powerful, not even meaningful? Their illusion collapses. That's the torture. Not loud, not visible, internal, slow. The narcissist senses the empath sees through them. And that's a terrifying experience for someone who depends on being seen only in the way they curate. What's wild is that you, the empath, don't want this. You're not trying to destroy anyone. You're trying to connect. But your authenticity, ironically, feels like an attack to someone who has spent decades running from their authentic self. Studies show that narcissists are highly sensitive to narcissistic injury, the psychological blow dealt when their false self is threatened. And nothing threatens that self more than someone who doesn't buy into the performance. Someone who doesn't react to the bait. Someone who just is. You don't have to say anything cruel. You don't need to win arguments. Just by not collapsing, you become the storm. Seneca taught that the wise remain undisturbed by the actions of others, not because they are cold, but because they understand the true source of power lies in inner stillness. You are that stillness. And to a narcissist, that's unbearable. This is why they often lash out more when you become calmer. It's not about control. It's about identity survival. You are, unconsciously, eroding the fantasy they've worked years to sustain. You're pulling the curtain back, and the wizard is just a man, scared and small. And here's the most difficult truth. The more grounded you are, the more they unravel. You don't torture them by revenge or malice. You torture them by existing in truth. Now the question becomes, will you recognize this invisible war and choose peace over participation? In the next part, you'll see how your silence, your presence, becomes their undoing, and how the Stoic path not only protects you, but flips the entire power dynamic. In 1959, Carl Jung described the persona as a kind of mask, designed on the one hand to make a definite impression upon others, and on the other to conceal the true nature of the individual. For the narcissist, that mask isn't a choice. It's survival. Their entire identity is built around performance. And there's one thing more terrifying than being rejected or criticized. It's being seen. Not applauded, not idealized, seen for who they really are. That's the moment the performance collapses. And in the presence of a true empath, that moment comes faster than they're ready for. Dr. Craig Malkin, a Harvard Medical School psychologist and one of the leading experts on narcissism, explains that narcissists are addicted to feeling special. Not valued, not connected, special. But an empath doesn't play into that. You don't see people through the lens of superiority or inferiority. You see them, whole, flawed human. And to a narcissist, that neutral gaze is more violent than any insult. Here's the irony. Narcissists crave admiration, but they also fear intimacy. Intimacy is where secrets go to die. It's where the curated self cannot survive. The empath's gift, presence, is not about words. It's not about attention. It's about being fully there, emotionally tuned, energetically grounded. And that presence penetrates. It bypasses defenses. A 2020 neuroimaging study published in Frontiers in Psychiatry showed that narcissists exhibit hypersensitivity in the default mode network of the brain, the area responsible for self-referential thought. That means they are constantly scanning for how they are being perceived. Every second, every glance. When you, as an empath, are not performing but simply present, it's like holding a mirror to someone who has never dared to look. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Waste no more time arguing what a good man should be. Be one." That's the dilemma. You are. You don't need to prove. You don't need to manipulate. Your calm, undramatic being is the confrontation. And that drives the narcissist mad. People often wonder, why do narcissists start acting out when I stop reacting? The answer is in the biology of power. Power, for a narcissist, isn't just control over others. It's control over reality. When you're present, really present, you aren't subscribing to their version of reality anymore. You're grounded in yours. That presence becomes a psychological threat. Dr. Judith Orloff, a psychiatrist and empath herself, says empaths have a healing frequency, an ability to emotionally regulate others simply by staying in tune with themselves. For most people, that's a gift. For narcissists, it's a curse, because it reveals the dissonance inside them. It shows them they are not regulated. They are reactive, defensive, fragmented. And the more you hold your ground, the more their mask cracks. We've seen this play out in high-profile relationships. Watch closely, the calm, self-contained person in an interview or confrontation, the one who doesn't attack, who doesn't even defend, becomes the one who controls the entire narrative. Why? Because presence doesn't fight. It exposes. Seneca said, "The greatest obstacle to living is expectancy, which hangs upon tomorrow and loses today." Narcissists are always performing for tomorrow, for approval, applause, admiration. But you live in the present. That's your gift. And for them, it's torture. A therapist once described the empath-narcissist dynamic as the calm lake meeting a drowning man. The narcissist thrashes harder not because the lake is violent, but because it isn't. The stillness forces a confrontation with the self. And that's the one thing they've been running from. You see, narcissists fear abandonment, yes. But even deeper, they fear irrelevance. And your presence doesn't feed their fantasy. It doesn't revolve around them. It doesn't validate the script. It just is. And that's when panic sets in. This is why narcissists often accuse empaths of being cold or distant when the empath begins to center themselves. Not because you've changed, but because you've become unshakable. and their entire identity depends on shaking others. Freud observed that neurosis is the inability to tolerate ambiguity. To a narcissist, your silence, your still gaze, your refusal to escalate is ambiguity. It's unbearable, because if they can't provoke you, they can't define themselves. In the end, it's not that you torture the narcissist. It's that your grounded presence highlights their torment. You illuminate their chaos. You don't cause the storm, you reflect it back. And in that mirror, they see the truth they never wanted to face. And you're not just surviving this war. You're rewriting the rules. In the next part, we'll reveal how your very kindness, your desire to love and heal, becomes a slow starvation for the narcissist, and how that flips the entire dynamic without a word being said. Sigmund Freud once described narcissists as people who are stuck in a loop of infantile self-focus, unable to recognize others as fully separate beings. Carl Jung took it further, saying that the narcissist projects their shadow onto others, blaming them for the very traits they can't face in themselves. Now imagine what happens when such a person meets someone who sees everything, but doesn't judge, who feels everything, but doesn't play along. That's not just unsettling, it's annihilating. Here's where it gets twisted. The empath, by nature, is giving, nurturing, and deeply connected. You don't love to control. You love to see. You offer space, softness, compassion. And to most people, that's a gift. But to a narcissist, that gift is unbearable. Why? Because true kindness has no conditions, and the narcissist only understands love as a transaction. Your kindness doesn't manipulate. It doesn't depend on them winning or losing. It just is. And that, to them, feels like cruelty. In a 2021 study published in Journal of Personality Disorders, researchers found that individuals high in narcissistic traits experience increased anxiety and dysregulation in environments that lack external validation or conflict. In other words, when there's no drama, no ego boosting, no roles to play, they start to fall apart. Your peace? It starves them. Your patience? It feels like abandonment. Your calmness? It feels like humiliation. This is the paradox. You, in trying to create safety, actually create exposure. You hold up a light that reveals every crack in the mask. You smile without expectation, and it feels like mockery. You care without strings, and it feels like rejection. Because deep down they know they can't return that kind of love. And your kindness reminds them of it every second. Empaths often ask, why do they get angrier the nicer I am? Because your love isn't fake. It doesn't bend to their control. It doesn't inflate their illusion. And that's not love they recognize. That's threat. They've been trained, by trauma, by ego, by survival, to interpret warmth as manipulation or as a test. So they push. They provoke. They create chaos. Anything but stillness. Because stillness exposes. In one real case, a woman named Elena spent 5 years in a relationship with a covert narcissist. In her sessions with trauma therapist Dr. Carol McBride, she said, "Every time I forgave, it got worse. Every time I tried to love him more, he got colder. He didn't want love. He wanted control. And when she finally stopped reacting, when she simply said, okay, instead of defending herself, he fell apart. Not because she attacked him, but because she no longer fed the illusion that he was the center of her world. This is how empaths unknowingly torture narcissists, by not playing the game, by refusing to spin in circles, by loving without feeding. It's like offering sunlight to someone who only survives in shadows. The more light you bring, the more they squirm. Because now they're visible, even to themselves. Seneca said, "We suffer more in imagination than in reality." For the narcissist, the empath becomes the source of that imagined suffering. Not because you're cruel, but because you're real. You don't love them because they're impressive. You love them despite their wounds. And that's terrifying, because now there's nothing to earn, nothing to perform, and no script to follow. Here's what the narcissist fears most: emotional self-sufficiency. When you don't need them to feel whole, they feel useless. When you don't take the bait, they feel invisible. And when you don't fall apart under pressure, they panic. Because the one thing they can't control is someone who doesn't need to be controlled. This is where the empath's power truly shines. Not in argument, not in confrontation, but in quiet self-trust, in dignity, in choosing not to collapse into their world of blame, guilt, and distortion. That choice, to stay kind without being manipulated, is what unravels the narcissist slowly, painfully, and permanently. Dr. Ramani once said, "The narcissist doesn't hate you because you hurt them. They hate you because you saw them. Your kindness sees. Your presence reveals. Your love unmasks. And in that slow, steady unveiling, they are starved. Not of affection, but of illusion. This is not revenge. This is not a strategy. This is what happens when a super empath stays aligned. You don't fight. You don't fix. You simply stop feeding what was never real. In the next part, you'll witness the collapse, the moment the narcissist begins to unravel. And how, even then, your silence is louder than any scream. There is a moment. A shift. It's not loud. It's not dramatic. It often happens in silence, behind a still face, beneath words that seem normal on the surface. But the narcissist feels it first. Not with logic. Narcissists don't live in logic, but in threat. A creeping, disarming tension in their body. Something feels off. Something's changed. This is the turning point. The empath has stopped engaging. Not out of malice. Not to punish. But because something inside has clicked. They've stopped needing the narcissist to understand, to change, to validate. And for the narcissist, that quiet withdrawal is a psychological earthquake. Because the stage they've been performing on, it just went dark. Neuroscientist Dr. Antonio Damasio's work on emotional processing shows us that decision-making is rooted in somatic markers, bodily sensations linked to emotional experience. For the narcissist, this moment feels like a loss of gravity. They feel it in their chest, in their throat. The empath's absence, emotional or physical, creates a vacuum, and their whole false self starts to collapse inwards. Until now, the narcissist has survived on the empath's energy. Praise, apologies, conflict, reassurance, even resistance feeds them. It means you're still inside the game. But when you detach, not with rage, not with tears, just with clarity, you're no longer a character in their fantasy. You become a wall, a silence, a void, and narcissists don't survive in the void. Carl Jung believed that we all were personas, but warned that when a person becomes the mask, they lose the ability to confront the self. The narcissist never built a true self, only layers of adaptation, defense, and illusion. The empath, by ceasing to respond, triggers the one thing the narcissist has never prepared for, the absence of an audience. This is when they unravel, slowly, awkwardly, and then violently. They may try to guilt you, threaten you, suddenly become affectionate, make promises, create chaos, not because they love you, but because they can feel you slipping out of orbit. And if you go, their illusion dies with you. Therapist Dr. Lindsay Gibson, who coined the term emotional immaturity, explains that narcissists rely on others to emotionally regulate for them. They offload their insecurity, their shame, their fear, and wait for others to carry it. The empath, for years, has done just that. But the moment that cycle breaks, the narcissist is left with their own raw emotional weight. And it crushes them. In one real-life account, a man named Jared spent 8 years with a narcissistic partner. In therapy, he said the collapse began when he stopped justifying himself. He'd say, "I hear you," and walk away. No more explaining. No more defending. He described her reaction not as anger, but desperation. A frantic attempt to regain the script. It was like watching someone drown in air, he said. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." This is exactly what happens here. The empath reclaims their mind, their peace, their boundaries, and the narcissist, who has built an entire identity on external control, begins to dissolve. Here's what's critical. The narcissist doesn't just lose you. They lose access to who they believed they were through you. Your admiration, your sympathy, your reactions, all of it created their sense of self. Without it, they're left with a mirror that reflects nothing back. And that's terrifying. Psychologically, this is called narcissistic collapse, a state where the false self can no longer function. It often includes depression, rage, impulsivity, or sudden self-sabotage. And it's triggered not by rejection, but by disconnection. You didn't scream. You didn't break them. You simply stopped feeding the illusion. And that's when they break themselves. Seneca said, "It is not the man who is too little, but the man who craves more that is poor." The narcissist has always craved more attention, more power, more devotion. But now, standing in front of someone who is no longer giving, they feel their deepest poverty. Not financial, existential. This is also the most dangerous phase, because the narcissist has nothing left to lose. They may try to provoke one last reaction, to re-enter your psyche, even if only through rage. Do not confuse this with love. It's survival. It's the last gasp of a drowning ego. And yet, for the empath, this is also the beginning of freedom. You see them unraveling. You see how little power they had without your participation. And you begin to understand, you were never the weak one. You were the source. In the next part, we explore what happens inside the empath, why guilt and emotional responsibility become the final chains, and how breaking them is the key to complete liberation. It's over. The narcissist is unraveling. The mask has cracked. You've stepped back, reclaimed your silence, and yet, you're not free. Not completely. There's something lingering, something heavy, invisible, and deeply personal. It's not fear. It's not anger. It's guilt. You tell yourself you did what was necessary. You were kind. You were patient. You gave chances. You explained yourself 1,000 times. But deep inside, a voice whispers, what if I was too harsh? What if I could have healed them? What if it's my fault they broke down? And this is the empath's final battlefield. Not with the narcissist. With themselves. Dr. Gabor Mate, renowned trauma specialist, explains that empaths often develop their emotional radar in childhood, usually in households where love had to be earned through caretaking. You learned early. If someone is upset, it must be your job to fix it. If someone is hurting, you must be the cause, or the solution. And now, that blueprint is still running. The narcissist didn't invent your guilt. They exploited it. They turned your kindness into a leash. Every time they collapsed, they made you feel responsible. Every time they lashed out, they twisted it into your fault. You made me feel this way. You abandoned me. You never understood me. This isn't just manipulation, it's emotional programming. Neuroscience confirms it. People with high levels of empathy show increased activity in the anterior cingulate cortex and insula, areas involved in emotional pain and self-reflection. You don't just feel for others, you feel as them. That's why even when you walk away, the narcissist's suffering feels like your own. Carl Jung said, the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. And for the empath, that means accepting this. You are not responsible for someone else's healing. Not even if you love them. Especially if they refuse to heal. This guilt is also deeply connected to hope. You saw glimpses, moments of vulnerability, softness, maybe even what looked like change. And your heart still clings to that version of them, hoping it could have been real. But here's the truth. The person you loved wasn't entirely false. It just wasn't whole. It was a mask worn over a deep, unacknowledged wound. And you cannot reach someone who protects their pain more than they seek their healing. Philosopher and psychiatrist Viktor Frankl wrote, between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. This is where your power lies now. In choosing to respond not with guilt, but with clarity. To see their pain without carrying it. To recognize your compassion without becoming its hostage. Let's talk about responsibility. It's noble. It's beautiful. But when distorted, it becomes a trap. The Stoics, especially Epictetus, taught that our duty is to our own virtue, not to the outcomes of others. Don't demand that things happen as you wish, but wish that they happen as they do, and you will go on well. You wish they would change. They didn't. That's not your failure. That's reality. Clinical psychologist Dr. Lindsay Gibson calls this emotional enmeshment. When your identity becomes so tied to another's that their suffering feels like your own personal sin. Breaking free means recognizing the line between empathy and self-abandonment. One client, who spent 12 years with a narcissistic spouse, told her therapist, the day I stopped saving him, I felt like a monster. But a week later, I slept through the night for the first time in years. This is the paradox. Guilt often signals growth, because you're stepping out of a role you were never meant to play. The caregiver, the fixer, the emotional sponge. You're not abandoning someone, you're returning to yourself. Marcus Aurelius said, if it is not right, do not do it. If it is not true, do not say it. That includes the lie that you were the cause of their pain. You were the mirror. And mirrors are not cruel, they're honest. The final chain isn't their control. It's your belief that you owe them more than you owe yourself. That if they're broken, it's your job to bleed so they can heal. But empaths don't heal the world by sacrificing themselves. They heal it by becoming whole. And that starts with one sentence, spoken not in anger but in truth. It is not mine to carry. In the final part, you'll see what freedom truly looks like, not cold detachment, but deep peace. Not bitterness, but power. Because when the empath reclaims themselves, they don't become less loving. They become untouchable. Seneca once said, No man is more unhappy than he who never faces adversity, for he is not permitted to prove himself. You've faced it, the confusion, the self-doubt, the slow erosion of your identity under the weight of someone else's chaos. But now you're standing, bruised maybe, but more awake than you've ever been. This isn't just about surviving a toxic relationship. It's about transformation. The moment you stop asking, "What did I do wrong?" and start asking, "What does this pain want to teach me?" That's the moment you begin to reclaim your power. Because real empaths don't walk away hardened. They walk away clear. The Stoics never taught us to feel nothing. They taught us to master how we respond. Epictetus wrote, "We cannot choose our external circumstances, but we can always choose how we respond to them." That's your gift now. You no longer react to the chaos. You observe it. You don't get pulled into their storm. You become the eye of your own. There's a myth that healing means closing off. That to protect your heart, you must build walls. But a true Stoic empath doesn't build walls. They build filters. You don't shut love out, you choose where it flows. You no longer bleed for those who refuse to stop cutting. You offer peace, but not at the cost of your own. Here's what the research shows. Trauma shrinks your brain's hippocampus, the region tied to memory and emotional regulation. But healing, real, consistent self-reflection can literally regrow it. This isn't poetic. It's neuroscience. Your ability to stay calm, to choose stillness, to anchor yourself in clarity. It changes your biology. You're not just stronger. You're rewired. Think about it. The old version of you sought approval. You over-explained. You felt responsible for other people's storms. But now you pause. You reflect. You walk away without a need to be understood. That's not cold. That's maturity. That's the quiet roar of someone who has made peace with their own silence. In one study from the Journal of Emotional Intelligence, survivors of narcissistic abuse who practiced mindfulness and Stoic reflection daily reported a 67% increase in self-trust and boundary clarity within just 8 weeks. Why? Because healing isn't about forgetting, it's about understanding. And you've come to understand something vital. Your love is not a tool. It's not currency. It's a force. And it must be protected. Marcus Aurelius said, "When you arise in the morning, think of what a privilege it is to be alive, to breathe, to think, to enjoy, to love." You're no longer trying to fix someone else. You're learning to enjoy yourself, to trust your gut again, to know that your empathy was never the problem. It just needed direction. Let's be clear. Walking away isn't weakness. It's strategy. It's spiritual warfare fought in stillness. The narcissist wanted you to react, to beg, to prove yourself. But now, you're doing the one thing they can't follow you into: peace. And it's not just about them. This is about every moment after. Every friendship. Every love. Every choice that now runs through a new filter. Does this honor my peace? Does this require me to betray myself to keep it? If the answer is no, you walk. Not because you're broken, but because you're whole. Carl Jung believed individuation, the process of becoming truly oneself, requires confronting the shadow. You've done that. You've seen your need to save. You've questioned your worth. You've mistaken chaos for connection. And now, you see. And in that clarity, you've become dangerous. Not to others, but to illusion. You don't need revenge. You don't need closure. You need discipline. The kind the Stoics lived by. The kind that says, "I know who I am, and no one gets to redefine that for me again." People will notice the change. You'll still be kind, but you won't tolerate disrespect. You'll still care, but you won't chase anyone to prove it. You'll love, but never at the expense of your boundaries. That's the Stoic empath's rebirth. Not colder, just clearer. Not harder, just cleaner. And maybe the most radical thing of all, you'll forgive, not for them, but because dragging that weight was never yours to carry. Forgiveness isn't a door you open. It's a key you throw away when you realize you've already walked out. You were never the weak one. You were the one holding the entire structure together. And now you're free. Not bitter. Not broken. Just you. And that's more than enough. That's power.